The air in the room froze before I glanced up. A chair shifted, a fork dropped. Then my grandfather George's voice cut through the abrupt quiet. "You've been receiving disability payments for years now." Every relative at the table looked straight at me. I felt the rush of heat, the air constricting. It was a silence that demanded an immediate reaction, not an answer. I took one ragged breath. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. That's when I noticed a man standing just behind my grandfather. He held a closed file folder. My parents refused to meet my gaze. Before anyone could utter another sound, the man opened the folder. I was raised in a household where quiet suppression moved faster than any truth. My mother, Catherine, and my father, Walter, required order, predictability, and total control. I quickly realized that to maintain peace, I had to minimize myself. I needed to be smaller, quieter, and easily overlooked. My younger sister, Phoebe, never needed that lesson. She was the focal point in every place she entered. If she asked for something, it instantly appeared. If she was about to fail, someone intervened before she ever experienced the fall. Dad used to justify this by saying, "She just needs a bit more help." That kind of support was something I never seemed to qualify for. I clearly remember when I first understood this deep disparity. I was 12. I stood in the kitchen holding a school form for a field trip. The fee was $35. Mom barely glanced away from the bills she was reviewing. "We cannot afford any extras this month," she stated. Minutes later, Phoebe rushed in, waving a brochure for dance classes. Mom smiled instantly. "Of course, darling." Same week, same stack of bills, yet completely different rules. By the time I reached high school, the pattern had only intensified, not broken. When Phoebe's laptop screen cracked, Dad ordered a brand new replacement that same afternoon. When mine finally quit working, he instructed me to use the public library. Phoebe received private tutoring. I received a sharp reminder to work harder. That was the operational structure of our house. 2 children, 2 separate realities, one undeniable truth that remained unspoken. Then came the injury. I slipped on wet flooring during my part-time job shift. My back never fully recovered. I learned to move cautiously. I meticulously kept receipts for every bottle of pain medication, always uncertain how long I would need to stretch them out. I once showed my mother the first prescription, hoping she would worry about me. She only sighed. "You must be tougher, Ava. Never depend on anyone." That statement became an unwritten rule, woven into every decision I made. College only made the situation worse. Phoebe attended an expensive private university nearby. Mom boasted about her choice for months. I enrolled at the community college and worked night shifts shelving inventory. When my textbooks became too costly, I simply dropped the class. When Phoebe found her elective classes difficult to schedule, they hired an expensive counselor to handle it for her. The most defining memory happened right in our kitchen. I had just finished my shift. My back was throbbing so severely it felt like a knife blade was tucked between my ribs. I placed the wrinkled prescription note on the counter next to a bottle with only 2 pills remaining. Mom was busy seasoning chicken for dinner. She did not turn around. "Could you please help me cover this cost?" I asked her. She kept chopping. "You are stronger than this, Ava. Stop being so dramatic." Beside her, the kitchen gleamed. They had purchased brand new appliances that spring. The stainless steel was polished, perfectly untouched by any actual hardship. I stood under the weak overhead lamp holding a bottle that rattled empty. That was the exact moment I realized the truth. Effort meant nothing. Pain meant nothing. Need meant absolutely nothing. Only hierarchy mattered. I did not cry. I did not argue. I just nodded, tucking the bottle back into my canvas bag. That day, I finally understood my specific place in this family structure. Returning to the dinner table, the space felt constrained. The lighting was cozy, but the atmosphere was anything but. My parents, Mother Catherine and Father Walter, occupied their usual central seats. They were positioned toward the relatives they prioritized. My younger sister Phoebe leaned near Mom, sharing a secret that made them both grin. I observed the relaxed posture of their shoulders. I noted their easy breathing. That level of domestic comfort was always denied to me. Grandfather George sat at the far end. He was the only one not pretending things were fine. His jaw was clenched. His eyes kept studying my face. He seemed to be looking for proof, perhaps hoping the truth was different. The man behind him, holding the folder, remained unnamed. His stiff posture showed he was not family. His presence was too formal. I later learned he was Mr. Miller, an auditor hired by grandfather. Right then, he just increased the anxiety in my chest. Dinner proceeded with small talk. People praised the food. My sister talked about her upcoming trip. Our parents nodded as if they orchestrated her whole life. I kept my hands in my lap, gripping my fingers to steady myself. Grandfather did not pick up his fork. He waited. Then he repeated his earlier accusation. "You've been getting disability payments for years." This time he spoke without raising his voice. He was too calm, letting the words sink in. The table fell silent once more. A cousin looked confused. My sister appeared irritated by the disturbance. A heavy feeling settled within me. It wasn't fear or rage. It was the realization that everyone here knew more about my own life than I did. My throat closed up. I whispered the only logical question. "What do you mean?" Mom's hand froze on her napkin. Dad stared intently at his dinner plate. No one replied. The man with the folder took a slight step closer. At that moment, I finally understood. This situation was entirely intentional, not an error. I excused myself before anyone had a chance to speak. No one attempted to stop me, which was startling. A daughter accused of theft benefits she never received usually causes a reaction, but only the low murmur of resumed conversation followed me. Everyone quickly pretended the scene was over. The narrow hallway was dim. A small lamp highlighted a framed photo of my parents and my sister. I was absent from that picture. I paused before the picture, allowing the cool air to hit my face. My heartbeat was not fast. It was slow and even. It had ceased being surprised by my family. I found the strap of my usual canvas bag. Inside, I carried folded copay receipts. There was the prescription bottle containing 2 pills. I also kept a small notebook logging all my medical costs. I once saw these details as proof of responsibility. Now they looked like proof of their actions. Evidence of a life lived without the support that was supposedly meant for me. I went into the bathroom across the hall. The mirror showed my fuzzy reflection under the weak overhead lamp. I pressed 2 fingers to my nose bridge, a habit of mine. A feeling heavier than anger settled in my chest. My reflection looked too calm, like someone waiting for instruction. I sat down on the toilet lid, which was closed, and took out my notebook. Every page was covered with dates, figures, and cheap ink blurring on the inexpensive paper. Rent, medicine, groceries, bus fare, clinic copays. I ran my thumb over a page corner. I remembered staying awake many nights, calculating if skipping one single meal would allow me to extend my prescriptions for another week. I always told myself that this financial juggling was temporary. I never knew my parents were doing their own calculations with funds that were designated to help me survive. I pulled out my phone. There were no new notifications, no missed calls, nothing from my parents asking about my sudden departure. Standard behavior. I opened my banking application. My current balance stared back at me. It was small, exactly what I expected, and painfully factual. I scrolled through the transaction history for the last year. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There were no unexpected large deposits. Certainly nothing that resembled the disability benefits grandfather had claimed existed. My heart rate stayed normal. Instead, a chilling clarity settled over me. Everything became quiet and sharp. Without hesitation, my fingers moved across the screen as I typed an email to the benefits office. "Hello, I am writing to formally request a complete history of all disability payments issued under my legal name. Please verify all registered addresses on file. Thank you." No explanations, no drama. Just a simple request for information that should have been accessible to me for 10 years. When I returned to the dining area, I did not go back to my empty chair. I paused near the entrance and observed them. Grandfather George remained at his end, arms tightly crossed. The auditor, Mr. Miller, was still standing, his folder still shut. My parents continued to act as if nothing significant had happened. My sister Phoebe was scrolling on her phone. I could have confronted them directly. I could have demanded to know why they stole what was mine, why they allowed me to struggle financially while they renovated their kitchen and funded Phoebe's trips, why they had falsely told relatives I was refusing to help myself. But confrontation was their preferred style of communication, not mine. Silence had always been my strategy for survival. Now, that same silence could become the framework for my control. I retrieved my coat from the back of my abandoned chair and put it on. Grandfather noticed my movement. His expression softened slightly. He didn't call out my name. He didn't need to. He already understood that I was not leaving out of fear. I was leaving to start building something new. Outside, the air felt thin and very cold. It scraped the back of my throat. I walked to the end of the driveway. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes. Street lights lined the road in a long row. I stopped beneath one light and opened my bag. I pulled out the small pile of receipts. Years of struggling to stay afloat. Not a single cent of this survival had been supplemented by the payment I supposedly received. The wind tried to lift the corners of the papers. I held them tighter. Later that evening, when I arrived back at my apartment in Denver, Colorado, the hallway light flickered as it always did. I left it on. I spread everything out on the floor: receipts, medical documentation, old letters, and my notebook. I sat cross-legged in the quiet, the low hum of the refrigerator filling the room. Then I began my assembly work. Categorizing, comparing, cross-checking. I did not need to understand why my parents had done this. I only required the facts. Facts do not waver. Facts do not lie. Facts do not show preference for one child over another. I opened a spreadsheet on my laptop. I started filling cells with specific dates, numbers, and diagnosis codes. I added a new column for the estimated disability support I should have been receiving. I looked up the standard monthly amount. I multiplied it by 10 years. I felt nothing at all, no shock, no anger, just the profound weight of the truth settling into place. Hour after hour, the spreadsheet expanded. It was a silent blueprint, a precise map of a life that had been lived without the necessary financial help intended for me. Around midnight, my email application chimed. The benefits office confirmed they had received my request. I stared at the screen, then at the scattered papers. I exhaled slowly. This time, I spoke to the empty room. I will not be the one who fixes what they broke. When I returned to my parents' house the next afternoon, the driveway was already full. Cars were lined up along the curb. It looked more like they were hosting a party than waiting for a confrontation to explode. I paused at the edge of the walkway. I let the cold winter air settle around me. My breath rose in faint white clouds before they disappeared. That seemed appropriate. Inside, the dining room looked identical to the previous night. The same warm lighting, the same long table, the same setup. My mother, Catherine, and Father Walter sat centered, acting like they were hosts of some important event. My younger sister Phoebe was next to Mom, chin resting in her hand, still scrolling on her phone. Grandfather George remained at the far end, his posture rigid, his eyes sharp. Mr. Miller, the auditor he had hired, stood behind him, the file folder still closed. No one offered a greeting. That was typical. Mr. Miller acknowledged me with a subtle, slight nod. Grandfather's jaw tightened. It was a silent agreement between us. Today would not resemble yesterday. "Let us conclude this," Grandfather stated. His voice was steady and formal. It lacked the usual affection. It wasn't rage, it was sheer authority, a type I hadn't seen him use in many years. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Dad, can we please postpone this? Ava is clearly..." He raised one hand, cutting her off completely. She instantly fell silent. "This is not about Ava," he corrected her. "This is about precisely what was stolen from her." Dad cleared his throat, attempting to sound calm. "We never took anything. There has simply been a mistake." Mr. Miller stepped forward. No introduction was needed. He opened the folder. The sharp sound of paper sliding against paper was clearer than any verbal accusation. Inside were documents stacked neatly by year, 10 years of records. He placed the first sheet on the table. It showed a column of monthly payments listed under my name and registered to an address, my parents' house address. He placed down the next sheet, representing another year. Same payment pattern, same deposit, and the same signature, my mother's. Mr. Miller tapped a line on the document with his pen tip. These payments were explicitly issued to provide support for Ava's documented medical condition, he explained. Every single deposit was rerouted to this household instead of her actual residence. Mom's color completely drained from her face. Phoebe stopped scrolling immediately. Dad leaned back, his arms crossed tight, bracing himself. We used that money for the family, he mumbled defensively. For your holidays, Mr. Miller asked quietly. For the kitchen renovation, for the new SUV you purchased 5 years ago. Mom blinked repeatedly and rapidly. We had pressing expenses, and Phoebe's school tuition was very costly. The room seemed to shrink. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Every number visible on those papers spoke for me, louder than I ever had the opportunity to speak. Mr. Miller placed the final document down. It was a summary, 10 years of monthly deposits, totaling over $280,000. I watched both my parents' faces transform. First came denial, then quick calculation, then something brittle and hollow. It was the look people get when they realize the story they constructed no longer belongs to them. Grandfather pushed his chair back. The echoing sound was loud. He pointed directly at Catherine and Walter. Anything you wish to say? The question did not roar. It landed cold and flat, like a final verdict. Mom's voice cracked. We genuinely thought she didn't need it. She has always been so independent. You told everyone she was irresponsible, Grandfather cut in sharply. You allowed her to go without necessary medication. You forced her to work through constant pain just so you could upgrade your kitchen. Dad looked at me, his eyes flitting between deep shame and terror. We were going to tell you eventually, he admitted, when Grandfather asked. Silence returned, tight and pervasive. I stood still, my hands loosely folded, my canvas bag hanging at my side. I felt strangely light. Not victorious, not triumphant, simply present. Finally, I was here in a moment defined by my own reality. Mr. Miller closed his folder. The accounts linked to these deposits will be immediately frozen pending investigation, he stated formally. Ava will be contacted directly regarding the process of restitution. Mom let out a small, sharp gasp. Dad's shoulders completely slumped. Grandfather turned to me. You do not have to remain here, he advised. You owe them nothing further. I nodded once, not toward him, but to myself. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair I had abandoned. The material felt familiar and cool. I slipped it on, gently tightening the collar. No final words, no farewells, just the soft sound of my footsteps as I walked out. Behind me, the silence finally shattered. It wasn't shouting, but the sound of people realizing the truth had already decided its side. Grandfather drove me back in silence. His hands were steady on the steering wheel. The road ahead stretched out in long, dark streaks. Streetlights raced across the windshield, slicing my reflection into fragments. I watched each piece pass and vanish, feeling like I was shedding a burden I had carried for too long. He didn't ask if I was fine. He didn't fill the car with hollow apologies or predictable outrage. He simply let the quiet linger, a quiet that asked for absolutely nothing. It felt foreign, almost too kind. When he stopped outside my apartment building, he left the engine running. They will not touch another dollar, he promised. Not one single cent. His voice was utterly final. I nodded. My fingers brushed the canvas strap of my bag. Inside was the folder Mr. Miller had given me before we left, copies of every document. My name was printed where it belonged, but my address was missing from every payment line. It was proof of how effortlessly they had erased me. I stepped out and walked toward the entrance. The hallway lamp flickered above me, just like always. But tonight, that flicker didn't irritate me. It felt honest, imperfect, yet entirely mine. Inside my apartment, I placed the heavy folder on the counter. The papers fanned out slightly, catching the low hum of the refrigerator. I pictured the kitchen where I grew up. The bright, polished appliances. the empty prescription bottle I hid in my bag. I stood there, breathing slowly, letting the memory simply exist without causing pain. This time, the silence didn't feel like pressure imposed on me. It felt like open air. I finally had space to breathe. I left the folder on my table all night, untouched. Its weight felt steady, its edges sharp in the morning light. It demanded no forgiveness or forgetting. It asked only that I accept things as they truly were. Boundaries are not always loud. They are often the quiet lines where you finally stop permitting others to dictate your story. If you have ever walked away from a version of yourself that someone else created, consider this your necessary reminder. You are entirely permitted to select the truth that rightfully belongs to you and walk toward the life that finally fits.